In 1965, a 10-year-old in rural Iowa could fire up a 40-horsepower tractor before breakfast and drive it clear across the back 40 alone. Nobody called anyone. Nobody worried. That was just Tuesday. But here is the twist. Number 7 on this list was so common that farm magazines printed instructions for it. Yet today, it could end with a knock on your door from the county. And number 2 put kids behind the wheel years before they could legally drive, and the whole town knew. These 25 things were ordinary parts of growing up on an American farm. Today, half of them would get a parent reported, investigated, or worse. Before we start, hit that subscribe button, because some of these you will not believe were ever allowed. Let us count down. Number 25, riding in the open bed of a pickup truck. Every farm kid in the 1960s knew the feeling. Wind whipping past, hay dust in your hair, hanging onto the wheel well as Dad bounced the Ford down a gravel road at 40 miles per hour. No seat belts, no tailgate up, sometimes a half dozen cousins piled in back with the dog and a couple bales of hay. You braced your boots against the ridges in the bed and watched the cornfields blur by. Trips to the feed store, the swimming hole, the county fair, all taken standing up in the back like it was nothing. A pickup cost around $2,000 new in 1965, and it hauled everything, including the children. Today, riding loose in a truck bed is illegal in most states, and a deputy who spots 3 kids back there will pull you over before you reach the mailbox. Number 24, drinking raw milk straight from the bulk tank. Before pasteurization warnings covered every carton, farm kids drank milk the way it came out of the cow. Still warm in the morning, ladled from the stainless steel tank into a tin cup, thick with cream that you skimmed off the top. Your mother poured it over cereal, churned it into butter, set it out for the cats. Nobody thought twice. The whole family had been drinking it for 3 generations and figured the cow knew what she was doing. A dairy cow gave maybe 4 gallons a day, and not a drop went to waste. Today, selling or serving unpasteurized milk to children is restricted or outright banned across much of the country, and health departments treat that warm tin cup like a public safety emergency. Number 23, going barefoot from May to September. The minute the frost left the ground, the shoes came off and stayed off. Farm kids ran across gravel driveways, climbed barbed wire fences, walked through cow pastures, and crossed hot blacktop roads with feet tough as shoe leather by July. Splinters were pulled out with a sewing needle at the kitchen table. A bee sting or a stubbed toe was just part of summer. Mothers figured fresh air and dirt built a kid up, and a pair of shoes cost real money you saved for school. The bottoms of those feet turned brown and hard, immune to thistles and the occasional rusty nail. Today, sending a child barefoot through a working farmyard full of machinery, animals, and tetanus risk would have a visiting relative reaching for the phone. Number 22, walking a mile to the bus stop alone in the dark. Long before sunrise in January, a 7-year-old would pull on a coat, grab a lunch pail, and head down a dirt lane to wait for the school bus at the end of the road. Alone, in the cold, sometimes in the snow. No parent walked them, no phone to call if something went wrong. They knew the route, knew the neighbors' dogs, knew to stamp their feet to stay warm. The whole point was that a child could manage on their own. Independence was not a luxury on a farm. It was the expectation. Today, leaving a young child to walk a remote road alone in the dark before dawn is exactly the kind of thing that gets a parent investigated for neglect, no matter how capable that kid actually is. Number 21, disappearing on a bicycle until the streetlights or the dinner bell. The single rule was simple: be home when the bell rings. Beyond that, farm kids vanished on their bicycles for entire days. No helmets, no pads, no way to reach them. They rode miles down county roads, jumped homemade dirt ramps, raced down hills with their feet off the pedals, and crashed plenty. Scrapes got washed with the garden hose. A bike cost around $30 and was a kid's freedom on two wheels. Parents had no idea exactly where their children were for hours at a stretch, and that was completely normal. Today, that combination of no helmet, no supervision, and no way to locate a child for 8 hours would strike most people as flat-out reckless, even though a whole generation survived it just fine. Number 20, swimming in the farm pond with nobody watching. Out behind the back pasture sat a muddy stock pond, and on a hot August afternoon, it was the finest swimming hole in the county. Kids stripped down, swung off a rope tied to an oak branch, and cannonballed into water nobody had ever measured the depth of. Snapping turtles, leeches, slick mud bottom, and not a single adult in sight. They taught each other to swim by trial and error. The big kids watched the little ones, more or less. A pond was free, and it kept everybody cool and out of the house. Today, an unfenced body of water with children swimming unsupervised is a liability nightmare, and leaving young kids to swim alone in it would be considered grounds for serious intervention. Here is where it gets serious. The next 10 involve machinery, livestock, and tools, the things that made farm childhood genuinely dangerous and genuinely formative. Number 19, hunting alone with a .22 rifle at age 10. Plenty of farm boys and a fair number of girls got their first rifle before they hit double digits. By 10, they were heading out at dawn, alone, to shoot rabbits and squirrels and keep the varmints out of the garden. They knew gun safety because their father drilled it into them, but they carried a loaded firearm through the fields with no adult anywhere near. A box of .22 shells cost under $1, and a kid was expected to bring home something for the pot, or at least not waste the ammunition. The rifle leaned in the corner of the mudroom like a garden rake. Today, a 10-year-old roaming the countryside alone with a loaded gun would generate frantic 911 calls and a very serious conversation with the authorities. Number 18, building tree houses with real saws, hammers, and nails. There were no plastic play sets ordered off a website. If a farm kid wanted a fort, they climbed up a tree with a handsaw, a hammer, a coffee can of bent nails pulled from old lumber, and built it themselves 20 feet off the ground. No railings, no engineering, no adult checking the work. They sawed boards, smashed thumbs, and nailed planks into wobbly platforms held together by stubbornness. Falls happened, stitches happened, scrap lumber was free behind the barn, and a kid who could swing a hammer was a kid earning their keep. Today, handing an 8-year-old a saw and sending them 20 feet up a tree to build an unpermitted structure would horrify a modern playground inspector and most modern parents. Number 17, handling a full-grown bull or a kicking cow at chore time. Farm kids were part of the labor force, and that meant getting up close with animals that weighed 2,000 pounds and had opinions about it. A 12-year-old might lead a bull by a nose ring, separate a cow from her calf, or wrestle a hog into a pen. Animals stepped on feet, swung horns, and kicked hard enough to break ribs. The kids learned to read a beast's mood and move quick. There was no other choice. Livestock was the family's living, worth hundreds of dollars a head, and everybody worked. Today, putting a child in a pen with a temperamental bull is the kind of thing that turns up in safety training videos as exactly what never to do, and a parent who allowed it could face real questions. Number 16. Burning the trash and tending the bonfire. Long before curbside pickup reached the country, every farm had a burn barrel, and tending it often fell to the kids. They hauled out the week's garbage, doused it with a splash of gasoline, struck a match, and stood back. Or did not stand back. Leaf piles in fall became towering bonfires, and roasting potatoes in the coals was half the fun. Singed eyebrows and burnt fingers were the cost of doing business. A box of matches cost pennies, and burning was simply how you got rid of waste. Today, handing a child gasoline and a match to light an open fire would violate burn ordinances in most counties and strike nearly everyone as wildly unsafe, no matter how careful that kid had learned to be. Number 15. Riding on the tractor fender while Dad plowed. There was no enclosed cab, no buddy seat, no roll bar on most tractors in 1965. A kid rode standing on the drawbar or perched on the steel fender right over the rear wheel, hanging onto Dad's shoulder, bouncing along for hours as the plow turned the soil. One slip backward and you were under the wheel or the implement. Everybody knew a story about it happening, and they rode anyway. It was how a child learned the work and kept Dad company in the field. A tractor was the most valuable machine on the place, costing thousands, and the kids grew up on it. Today, riding an extra person on a tractor, especially a child on the fender, is the single most cited cause of farm child fatalities, and safety agencies treat it as an absolute, unbendable no. Number 14. Climbing the silo and the barn rafters for fun. A grain silo stood 50 feet tall with a steel ladder running straight up the side, and farm kids climbed it on a dare for the view. Up in the haymow, they walked the open beams 30 feet above the concrete floor like a tightrope, swinging from the rafters into the loose hay below. No harness, no net, no second thought. The barn was a playground that happened to have lethal drops. A fall from the rafters could end everything, and yet that loft was where childhood happened on rainy days. Today, that kind of unsupervised climbing at fatal heights would be flagged immediately as severe child endangerment, and most insurance companies would cancel a policy over it. Number 13. Leaping from the hayloft into the wagon below. Speaking of that loft, when the hay was stacked high, the great sport was climbing to the top and jumping down into a wagon, a loose pile, or just onto the packed bales 8 feet below. Kids did it for hours, scrambling up and launching off, occasionally landing wrong and limping for a week. Sometimes they jumped through the open loft door into the bed of a truck full of straw. The hay cushioned most of it. Most of it. A sprained ankle was a badge of honor, and there was no adult posted at the bottom to catch anyone. Today, watching children repeatedly leap from a second-story barn opening with no supervision and no soft landing would empty a county fair of parents in seconds. Number 12. Driving the farm truck to town at 12 years old. Out on the back roads, the law was more of a suggestion, and plenty of farm kids were running errands behind the wheel years before they had any license. A 12-year-old would take the old pickup into town for a part, a sack of feed, or to fetch a sibling sitting on a cushion to see over the dash. The local sheriff knew whose kid it was and let it slide. The truck was a tool, and a kid who could drive it was a kid who could help. Gas ran about 30 cents a gallon. Today, an unlicensed 12-year-old driving a truck on a public road would get pulled over, the vehicle impounded, and the parents charged, no matter how many decades of backroad tradition stood behind it. Number 11. Working the hay baler and the auger, machines that took fingers. Haying season meant kids working alongside dangerous equipment with no guards and no off switch within reach. They fed twine into the baler, walked beside the power takeoff shaft, spinning at 1,000 revolutions per minute, and reached into augers and corn pickers to clear jams while the machine was still running. These were the machines that maimed grown men. Everybody on a farm knew somebody missing fingers or an arm. The kids did it anyway because the hay had to come in before the rain. A baler cost a small fortune and ran from dawn to dusk in July. Today, putting a child anywhere near unguarded farm machinery violates child labor laws written specifically because of how many kids those machines took. Number 10. Running the chainsaw and the power tools alone. Come fall, the woodpile had to be filled for winter, and a teenager, sometimes younger, was handed a chainsaw and pointed at the dead timber. No chaps, no face shield, no ear protection, just a roaring saw and a tree to drop. Kids split wood with a maul, ran the bench grinder, welded and operated the drill press in the shop without anyone standing over them. They learned by doing, and the occasional gash got wrapped in a rag and electrical tape. Heating the farmhouse meant cords of wood, and every hand worked. Today, a miner running a chainsaw unsupervised is a textbook child labor violation, and most people would be stunned to see a 12-year-old felling trees alone. Number 9. Riding horses bareback with no helmet, no saddle, no permission. Farm kids treated horses like bicycles. They grabbed a handful of mane, swung up bareback, and galloped across open fields with nothing on their heads and no adult anywhere. They rode double, raced each other, jumped ditches, and got thrown plenty. A bad fall off a running horse could break a neck, and everybody knew it. But a horse was transportation, and freedom rolled into one, and the kids rode every chance they got. They learned balance the hard way by hitting the ground. Today, the equestrian world treats a helmet as non-negotiable, and the sight of a young child galloping bareback and unsupervised would have onlookers convinced they were watching a tragedy about to happen. Now, the last 8. These are the ones that separated farm childhood from everything else, and the ones a modern parent simply could not get away with. Number 8. Helping with slaughter and butchering day. When the weather turned cold, it was butchering time, and the children were not sent inside. They watched and helped as the family killed and processed a hog or a steer in the yard, holding pans, scraping hides, grinding sausage, learning exactly where the meat on the table came from. Blood, knives, and the whole stark reality of it, by age 8 or 9. Nobody thought it was traumatic. It was food for the winter, and understanding it was part of growing up. A side of beef fed the family for months. Today, exposing young children to a home slaughter would strike most modern parents as deeply disturbing, and some would consider it grounds to question a family's judgment entirely. Number 7. Riding behind the pesticide sprayer and handling farm chemicals barehanded. This is the one the farm magazines actually printed instructions for. Kids mixed and loaded pesticides, walked behind the sprayer in the drifting mist, and handled DDT and other chemicals with their bare hands. No gloves, no mask. Some neighborhoods even had trucks fogging clouds of insecticide that children chased on their bicycles for fun. Nobody knew, or nobody said, what those chemicals did. The crops had to be protected, and the kids helped. A bag of chemical cost a few dollars and saved the harvest. Today, the labels alone require respirators and protective suits, and exposing a child to those substances barehanded would bring environmental and child welfare authorities down on a farm fast. Number 6. Being left home alone in charge of younger siblings for a full day. When the parents drove to the stockyards or the far field, the oldest kid, sometimes only 10 or 11, was left in charge of a house full of younger children for the entire day. They cooked on the stove, tended the wood fire, handled emergencies, and kept everyone fed and more or less alive until dark. There was no phone to call for help, and no neighbor close enough to matter. The expectation was simply that a capable kid could run the household. And they did. Today, leaving a 10-year-old alone in charge of toddlers for a full day is illegal in many states and a clear trigger for a neglect investigation, regardless of how responsible that child happened to be. Number 5. Whittling and carrying a pocket knife everywhere, including to school. Every farm kid had a pocket knife by age 7, and it never left their pocket. They whittled sticks, cut twine, gutted fish, and brought that knife to school without anyone batting an eye. Trading knives on the playground was a thing. Carving your initials into a fence post was a thing. The knife was a tool, as ordinary as a pencil, and a kid who did not carry one was the odd one out. A good pocket knife cost a couple dollars and lasted a lifetime. Today, a child bringing a knife of any kind to school triggers automatic suspension, police involvement, and zero-tolerance policies, and the idea of 7-year-olds swapping blades at recess belongs to another world entirely. Number 4. Skipping weeks of school for planting and harvest. When the crops were ready, school came second. Farm kids were pulled out for days or weeks at a stretch to plant in spring and bring in the harvest in fall, working 12-hour days in the fields beside the adults. The teachers understood. The whole rural school calendar was built around it. A child's labor was genuinely needed, and education waited for the weather. Nobody filed a report. Nobody questioned it. The harvest meant the difference between a good year and a hard winter. Today, pulling a child out of school for weeks of farm labor would put a family in front of a truancy officer and possibly a judge, and the long hours alone would violate modern child labor protections. Number 3. Operating the grain wagon and standing in the grain bin. Few jobs on the farm were as deadly as this one, and kids did it routinely. They climbed into grain bins and wagons full of corn to break up clumps and keep the grain flowing, walking on a surface that could swallow a person in seconds. Flowing grain pulls a body under like quicksand, and once it covers you, there is no pulling free. Children stood in it, walked across it, and worked it down by hand. Everybody knew the danger and did it anyway because the grain had to move. A full bin was the year's income. Today, grain bin entanglement is one of the most feared hazards in all of agriculture, and putting a child in flowing grain is regarded as nothing short of life-threatening negligence. Number 2. Driving the car on public roads years before 16. Back roads were one thing, but plenty of farm kids were driving the family car on actual highways into town at 13 or 14, dropping off eggs, picking up the mail, hauling siblings to town for groceries. The license came whenever they finally got around to it. Everybody in the county recognized the car and knew the kid driving was a Johnson or a Miller, and they waved as they passed. The freedom was total. The car was the family's main transportation, and a teenager who could drive lightened the whole household's load. Today, an unlicensed 14-year-old driving on a public highway would be stopped, the parents cited, and the whole arrangement treated as a serious crime, no matter how long that tradition ran in farm country. And finally, number 1, total unsupervised freedom from sunup to sundown. This is the one that defined it all. A farm child in the 1960s woke up, did their chores, ate breakfast, and then simply vanished into the world until the supper bell rang. They roamed hundreds of acres, crossed creeks, climbed bluffs, explored abandoned barns, and met up with cousins miles away, with no phone, no tracking, and no adult who could have found them in an emergency if they tried. Parents genuinely did not know where their children were for 10 or 12 hours a day, and they trusted the land and the kids to sort it out. That freedom built a kind of resourcefulness and grit that is almost impossible to find now. A child learned to read weather, fix what broke, and handle whatever came because there was no one else to do it. Today, that complete absence of supervision and contact, that willingness to let a child disappear into the countryside all day, is exactly what modern society defines as neglect. The very thing that made farm childhood what it was would now, on paper, get a parent reported. So there you have it. 25 things that were just ordinary life on an American farm 60 years ago, and nearly every one of them would raise alarms today. Times changed, and so did what we are willing to risk. But that generation grew up tough, capable, and free in a way few kids ever will again. Which one surprised you the most? Drop it in the comments. And if your own folks did any of these, tell us. We want to hear it.